Bradley Hansen was an ordinary teenage boy navigating life in the mid-1990s. At the age of 13, he had begun to develop an interest in dating, and there were numerous girls his age at his school in Phoenix, Arizona. Enrolled at Centennial Middle School, Bradley had formed a close-knit group of friends whom he trusted and relied upon. Among his closest companions was Jeremy Bark, with whom Bradley shared a strong bond. The two were nearly inseparable, often meeting up before school and being the first to gather after classes ended. In November 1995, the friends discussed Veterans Day, a well-known holiday in the United States. Excited about the upcoming day off from school, they eagerly made plans for how to spend their time. However, an interesting twist emerged. Bradley's mother was unaware that school would be closed for the holiday, and he chose not to inform her. It remains unclear whether he kept this information from her out of concern that she might disrupt their plans or if he simply did not recognize her lack of knowledge regarding the holiday. Regardless of the reason, Bradley and Jeremy were poised for an eventful day. When Veterans Day arrived on November 10th, Bradley woke up, dressed, and prepared for the day as if it were any other. He then borrowed a bike from his neighbor and set off toward the school. His mother observed him as he departed, seemingly under the impression that it was a typical school day, and did not give the matter much further thought. However, unbeknownst to her, Brad had no intention of attending school that day. At some point during his journey, Brad altered his direction and made his way to his friend Jeremy's residence. It is believed that one of the factors contributing to Brad's enthusiasm for the day's plans was the anticipated arrival of a girl named Taylor at Jeremy's house later that afternoon. Taylor was a schoolmate, and it is reasonable to assume that one or both of the boys harbored a crush on her. Given that all the parents were occupied with work for the day, one can only speculate about the thoughts racing through the minds of these teenagers when Taylor agreed to visit. While the specifics of their plans remain unclear, the fact that they chose to keep their intentions hidden from their parents suggests they might have been contemplating some mischievous activities. Although I cannot assert this with absolute certainty, considering the events that would unfold just a few hours later, this hypothesis may not be as implausible as it appears. Shortly after Brad arrived at Jeremy's house, the two encountered Jeremy's stepfather, Daniel, in the kitchen. It appears that Jeremy's father was also unaware that the boys were not attending school that day, as he believed they would be leaving shortly after his departure around 7 a.m. Undoubtedly, the boys were elated to have successfully evaded their parents and secured an entire day for themselves, allowing them the freedom to engage in nearly any activity without supervision, a thrilling prospect for two teenage boys. However, their plans were almost thwarted when, around 8 a.m., Brad's mother, Rhonda, suddenly realized that it was Veterans Day. Rhonda repeatedly attempted to contact Brad through pages, a notable action considering it was 1995, yet he did not respond. Throughout the day, she sent him multiple pages, but he remained unresponsive. Rhonda finished her work around 2 p.m. that afternoon, and upon returning home, she still could not find Brad. This behavior was out of character for him, as he typically maintained communication with his mother. His sudden silence raised significant concern for Rhonda. Although Brad was an ordinary, somewhat reckless teenager, he consistently made an effort to keep in touch with Rhonda. Therefore, his unexpected disappearance triggered alarm bells in her mind. In her quest for information, Rhonda reached out to various neighbors and friends, hoping to discover if anyone had seen Brad that day, but no one had any leads. She also contacted several of Brad's friends and classmates, yet none could provide any information. Eventually, Rhonda decided to call Jeremy, which led to a pivotal moment. Jeremy shared details about the boys' activities that morning, but he mentioned that Brad had left early that day without revealing his destination. According to Jeremy, Brad simply took his bike and rode away. Rhonda requested that Jeremy inform Brad to return home by 5 p.m., or she would have to report him as missing to the authorities. Jeremy agreed, and they concluded the call. Following this conversation with Jeremy, some unusual events unfolded. It has been reported that Rhonda made the decision to contact Jeremy's stepfather, Daniel, who informed her that he had last seen both boys at 7 a.m. that morning. Daniel assured her that he would speak with Jeremy upon his return home and would relay any information he could gather. However, Immediately following the call, Rhonda felt compelled to take action rather than wait for Brad's return. She needed to do something proactive. Consequently, she got into her car and began visiting all the local hangout spots, fervently hoping to find any sign of Brad. Unfortunately, her efforts were in vain. Later that evening, the situation deteriorated further. A missing person investigation commenced. After finishing work that evening, Jeremy's stepfather, Daniel, fulfilled his promise and spoke with Jeremy. However, for reasons that remain unclear, Daniel did not return Rhonda's call. Despite knowing that Rhonda was actively searching for her missing son, he chose not to reach out. When the police arrived to take statements from Rhonda, they initially categorized Brad's disappearance as a runaway case. They were uncertain of the reasons but believed that Brad had likely left home voluntarily. Rhonda, however, was convinced that something dreadful had occurred to her son and dismissed the notion that he would run away. Despite her assertions, the detectives appeared largely unaffected by her concerns and continued their investigation in their own manner. As the night progressed without Brad's return, Rhonda's anxiety and apprehension escalated significantly. The police requested that Rhonda refrain from conducting her own investigation into her son's disappearance, fearing it might interfere with their efforts. Nevertheless, Rhonda disregarded their advice and was determined to search tirelessly for her son. She dedicated the entire weekend to conversing with everyone she knew who had ever encountered Brad, in hopes of uncovering any information, but unfortunately, no one could provide any insights. The only exceptions were a few of Brad's classmates. Following Brad's disappearance, unsettling rumors began to circulate within the school, suggesting that something grave had occurred. These rumors indicated that a gunshot had been heard in the early afternoon on the day Brad went missing. It was alleged that Jeremy and Brad had discovered a firearm in the house that day, and during a mishap, Jeremy had accidentally discharged a round, which narrowly missed Brad and became embedded in a wall. However, the situation became even more alarming when it was rumored that Brad had taken possession of the weapon and might have intended to use it to take his own life. This development may appear to be a drastic and unforeseen turn in the narrative, and indeed it is. Up until this moment, there had been no indications that Brad was capable of such actions, nor had he ever been characterized as depressed. This only heightened the suspicions of Rhonda and the police regarding these rumors. Nevertheless, it is important to recognize that rumors must originate from somewhere, suggesting that there may be more veracity to this account than anyone was willing to acknowledge. A person of interest, Daniel, Jeremy's father, would contact Rhonda around November 13th, approximately 3 days after Brad's disappearance. During their conversation, Rhonda expressed her concerns about the rumors circulating regarding Brad's intentions. Daniel reassured her that these were merely unfounded speculations and took the initiative to contact his girlfriend, asking her to verify that all family firearms were securely stored and accounted for. Upon checking the safe, Daniel's girlfriend, Debbie, confirmed that everything was intact and nothing was missing. While this information provided some relief to Rhonda, it also left her feeling unsettled, as it meant she was back at the beginning of her worries. Consequently, Jeremy resolved to reach out to Brad's mother directly. Shortly thereafter, Jeremy contacted Rhonda to recount the events of the day. Although the specifics of their conversation remain unclear, Jeremy mentioned that he had last seen Brad when he departed on a bicycle borrowed from a neighbor. He noted that Brad had not been in a particularly good mood at the time of his departure. Jeremy was able to assert that he was likely the last person to have seen Brad. He also recalled that during their last exchange, Brad had expressed that his life, in his own words, sucked, just before riding away. However, by the following Monday, with Brad still missing and rumors escalating in frequency and severity, the school determined it was necessary to intervene. This is when Schelling intervened. As one of the primary administrators at the school, and engaged in discussions with Jeremy on 2 occasions that day, in addition to speaking with numerous other students connected to Brad. And reported that she was able to ascertain that Jeremy, Brad, and Taylor, the female friend who had visited, had all spent time together that day. Prior to this, it appeared that Jeremy had not mentioned Taylor's presence at the house. This detail seemed to emerge only after and had a private conversation with Taylor. For reasons unknown, Jeremy appeared to be attempting to exclude Taylor from the narrative, but the situation had since intensified, and opted to bring both Taylor and Jeremy into the same room, at which point Jeremy modified his account slightly, stating that the last time he saw Brad, he was leaving on his bike, claiming he would return in approximately 10 minutes, yet he never did. This is where the situation became particularly intriguing, as Jeremy's narrative, which he had shared with his parents and investigators, began to unravel. It became evident that Jeremy possessed knowledge regarding Brad's whereabouts but was reluctant to disclose it. Recognizing that Taylor and Jeremy were presenting entirely different accounts of the events, and decided to speak with Taylor privately to uncover the truth about that day. Taylor was remarkably candid, even when she understood that her honesty could potentially implicate Jeremy in serious trouble. Taylor acknowledged that she had arranged to meet the boys at Jeremy's residence that day. Upon her arrival, she observed Brad's bicycle in the driveway, which contradicted the account Jeremy had provided. However, upon entering the house, she found that Brad was inexplicably absent. On the kitchen table, she spotted Brad's backpack and pager, yet he was nowhere to be seen. When Taylor inquired about Brad's whereabouts, Jeremy claimed that Brad had already left. Taylor was skeptical of this explanation, as all of Brad's belongings remained behind. Where could he have gone, and why would he depart without his possessions? Taylor suspected that Jeremy was playing a prank and believed that Brad was likely hiding somewhere within the house. After searching the entire house and calling out for Brad without receiving any reply, Taylor began to entertain the possibility that Jeremy was indeed being truthful. However, just as she started to accept this notion, her doubts resurfaced. While exploring the laundry room, she discovered Brad's shoes, which were stained with red marks. A crime scene. Upon discovering the shoes, Taylor continued her investigation in the room and found Brad's t-shirt in the washing machine, also marked with red stains. The most alarming detail was a small hole in the front of the shirt. Shortly thereafter, she noticed several red drips in the kitchen. When she inquired of Jeremy regarding the events that transpired, he recounted that he and Brad had engaged in a dispute concerning her. One of the boys had insulted her, prompting the other to take offense. This disagreement escalated into a physical altercation, during which Brad struck Jeremy with a bar stool, resulting in the damage to his shirt, the red stains, and the marks on the floor. However, Jeremy exhibited no visible injuries on his person. It was then that Taylor observed a small hole in the kitchen wall. Jeremy asserted that Brad had seized a weapon from his stepfather's cabinet and discharged a single shot. Fortunately, the shot missed Jeremy but left a noticeable hole in the wall. Shortly thereafter, Brad fled the residence, stating that he would return shortly. After Taylor disclosed this information, and opted to bring Jeremy back into the room. She questioned him about various elements of Taylor's account, to which he ultimately conceded to most of them. However, when she inquired about the hole in the kitchen wall and the alleged discharge of a weapon that day, he refuted these claims, insisting they were mere rumors. Upon contacting Daniel, Jeremy's stepfather, he supported his son's assertions, maintaining that no weapons had been utilized that day and that there was no hole in the kitchen wall. A few weeks later, the police would interview Jeremy at his school, during which he would once again modify his narrative, this time alleging that Brad had assaulted him with a butter knife before departing the home and never returning. Jeremy also mentioned his belief that Brad had either fled to Arizona with a man named Poppy or gone to California to be with his father, though he was not entirely certain. On December 15th of the following month, Daniel contacted two detectives involved in Brad's case to request a meeting. He revealed that Jeremy had finally confessed that he and Brad had been handling a weapon on the day of Brad's disappearance. According to Daniel, Jeremy admitted that a single shot had been fired that day. He had even retrieved the bullet from the kitchen wall and kept it hidden until now, which Daniel subsequently handed over to the investigators for analysis. However, a question arose: how had Daniel overlooked the hole in the wall until this point? When detectives arrived at the family home, they asked Jeremy to reenact the events of the day Brad went missing. He recounted an argument during which Brad allegedly grabbed a weapon and fired a shot that narrowly missed his shoulder. However, upon examining the location of the bullet hole, the detectives concluded that, given its low position, the bullet could not have merely grazed Jeremy's shoulder, it would have struck him directly. When confronted with this discrepancy, Jeremy reportedly lowered himself slightly to make the hole appear more aligned with his shoulder. This prompted the detectives to suspect that something was amiss. Approximately 3 weeks later, in January 1996, the detectives had reconsidered the circumstances and no longer believed that Brad had run away. They sensed that there was significantly more to the narrative than Jeremy was prepared to acknowledge. Uncertain whether Jeremy was culpable or merely shielding his best friend, they recognized that something was amiss. Acting on instinct alone, they resolved to confiscate the family's trash can for forensic analysis. There exists a version of the account suggesting that a local waste collector alerted the detectives, while other reports assert that the detectives acted solely on intuition. The veracity of these accounts is unclear, yet it is largely inconsequential to the case. Upon acquiring the trash can, the detectives observed a brown residue at the bottom, accompanied by some brown streaks on the exterior. The detectives speculated that this dried substance might have belonged to Brad. Regrettably, when samples were analyzed and matched against those from Brad's mother, a direct familial connection was established, indicating that the origin of the evidence was indeed a close relative of Rhonda. Around this period, Jeremy and his mother made the decision to relocate to Las Vegas. They never provided an explanation for their choice, particularly during an ongoing investigation. Fortunately, law enforcement was able to coordinate with authorities in Arizona, maintaining communication with Jeremy. This proved fortuitous, as in February 1996, approximately 4 months following Brad's disappearance, Jeremy determined that he could no longer endure the situation. He ultimately disclosed the events of that November day to the detectives. A disturbing admission: when Jeremy arrived at the police station, he promptly admitted that he and Brad had been handling firearms on the day Brad was last seen. He recounted that they were playing with several weapons when he inadvertently aimed one at Brad. In the process, he accidentally struck his hand against an object, causing him to flinch, which resulted in the weapon discharging without his finger ever being on the trigger. The bullet hit Brad, who remained alive at that moment. However, what is particularly alarming is that Jeremy, in a state of panic, began to clean the scene of the incident, leaving Brad behind, in urgent need of assistance. Jeremy removed the bullet from the wall and discarded it along with several cigarette butts they had smoked earlier that day. Although Jeremy's account is notably graphic, he maintains to the detectives that the entire incident was accidental. He asserts that the weapon was not even cocked when it discharged, a claim that experts deem highly implausible. They suggest that Brad may have survived for up to an hour after the gunshot, indicating there was ample time for him to receive help. Tragically, due to Jeremy's panic, Brad ultimately lost his life as a result of gross negligence. It remains unclear whether Jeremy feared his parents discovering their handling of firearms or if he was concerned about facing imprisonment. This aspect has never been fully clarified. Nevertheless, Jeremy was preoccupied with cleaning the crime scene and concealing his own errors, leaving him no time to assist his best friend in surviving what was evidently an unfortunate accident. Ultimately, Jeremy asserts that he removed Bradley and placed him in the family trash bin. Bradley would remain in that bin for an entire week before the trash collectors emptied it. It remains a mystery how they failed to discover Brad's remains, but they did not. Ultimately, Jeremy was apprehended and charged with second-degree offenses. Investigators are convinced that there is no possibility the weapon discharged accidentally that day. Upon examining the weapon, detectives concluded that a mere bump could not have caused it to fire. They believe the trigger was intentionally pulled, even if Bradley's death was genuinely an accident. However, many, including the investigators, are skeptical that it was an accident at all. The lengths to which Jeremy went to hide his actions imply that there may be much more to this case than he is prepared to acknowledge. In the end, Jeremy was convicted and sentenced to 22 years in prison after being tried as an adult, despite being only 13 years old at the time of the incident. He was incarcerated in January 1998 and was scheduled for release in December 2021, which means he is now a free individual. However, the most perplexing aspect of this case is the situation concerning Jeremy's parents. I do not intend to cast any accusations, but it is difficult to comprehend how these events could have transpired without their awareness. For instance, Jeremy's stepfather, Daniel, asserts that he examined the weapon and even detected its odor, yet he maintains that it had never been discharged. Furthermore, he claims that all of his ammunition was accounted for, which contradicts the fact that one round had evidently been fired. Daniel also states that all of his firearms were secured in the family safe. This raises the question of whether Jeremy possessed a key or code to access the safe. It is conceivable that he may have taken the key from his father without his knowledge, yet this does not clarify why Daniel insisted there was no hole in the kitchen wall when it was clearly visible. Additionally, when Daniel contacted investigators shortly after the incident, he revealed that Jeremy had confessed to discharging a weapon that day and even submitted the slug that supposedly emerged from the wall. However, this could not have been the bullet that ended Brad's life, as it is known that Jeremy had already disposed of that one. This implies that 2 rounds were fired from the weapon, yet Daniel remained oblivious to the missing ammunition. Moreover, one must consider the trash bin. Did no one take out the garbage during the 4 months since Brad disappeared? Surely one of Jeremy's parents would have noticed the liquid accumulating at the bottom of the bin and seeping down the sides. It is difficult to believe that no one would have noticed a boy at the bottom of the bin. Furthermore, it is hard to imagine that no one would have detected an unpleasant odor. While I cannot, in good conscience, place blame on Jeremy's parents, the circumstances surrounding this incident raise significant concerns for me. My heart aches for Rhonda and the entire family of Brad. There were numerous opportunities to intervene and potentially save this boy's life. I also feel a deep sense of sympathy for Jeremy, as it appears that if this was merely an unfortunate accident, his own fear led to the loss of his best friend and a 22-year prison sentence, an outcome that could have been averted with a simple call for medical assistance. This case is undeniably tragic from start to finish. I sincerely hope that Rhonda has found some semblance of peace, despite the fact that nothing can ever restore her beloved son.